The galaxy did not notice the beginning of the end with an explosion. It noticed it with absence. 3 entire star systems, Earth 9, Calden Reach, and Vora Prime, simply stopped existing in every form of communication. No trade signals, no distress beacons, no military reports. At first, the Galactic Union assumed a network failure. It was routine in the outer sectors where space interference was common. But then the 4th system went silent. Then the 5th. And by the time the 6th star system stopped responding, the Union's central command stopped calling it an accident. Because accidents don't leave behind perfect silence. On long-range scans, the systems were still there. Stars still burned, planets still orbited. But no life signatures remained, not a single biological trace. It was as if existence itself had been politely erased, leaving everything else untouched. The scientists called it null expansion. The soldiers called it impossible. And deep within classified Earth archives, buried beneath layers of political denial and erased history, a single forbidden term resurfaced in automated threat classification systems. Abyssal signature DATACTAD. No one had officially used that term in over 800 years. Because no one was supposed to remember what it meant. Across the Galactic Union, panic spread in controlled waves. Entire fleets were repositioned. Evacuation orders were drafted and canceled within minutes. Species that had once fought wars over resources now agreed on one thing. Whatever was happening, it was not meant for them to survive. Then came the signal. It did not travel through normal space. It did not obey frequency laws. It simply appeared inside every listening station, every command bridge, every civilian receiver, like a thought forced into reality. At first it was noise. Then patterns formed. Mathematical structures layered over screaming distortions. And finally, one repeated fragment stabilized long enough to be understood. Hunger, hunger, hunger. The transmission did not stop for 17 minutes. And during those 17 minutes, several analysts suffered neurological collapse simply from decoding proximity. When the signal finally ended, every system that had received it began reporting the same secondary anomaly. A gravitational distortion forming at the edge of known space. Not a ship, not a fleet, but a breach. Something was pushing its way into the galaxy. And it was not coming alone. The Union Council convened in emergency session. Species representatives argued, panicked, demanded alliances, demanded retreat, demanded answers no one could provide. But Earth did not attend the open session. Earth had already moved. Deep beneath the planet's surface, in a facility that officially did not exist on any map, ancient machinery began to awaken. Layers of dust and time peeled away from structures that had not been active since before interstellar travel was publicly discovered. A system buried in silence for centuries began to breathe again. On the surface, governments denied involvement. In orbit, satellites quietly rerouted themselves away from Earth's dark side. And in the void behind the moon, 13 objects detached from gravitational shadow. No launch signatures. No propulsion trails. Just presence. Union sensors immediately flagged them. Unknown designation, unknown origin, unknown technology class. And yet, there was something familiar in their pattern. Like something the galaxy had once feared enough to erase from memory. A single encrypted transmission arrived across all Union military channels, bypassing every firewall, every encryption layer, every quantum barrier. It contained only 2 words. Black Sun. Immediately, half the Union command structure flagged the transmission as mythological spam or psychological warfare. But Earth Command flagged it as confirmed active. And that was when everything changed. Because Earth Command had not acknowledged that designation in centuries. Not since the last war that no species remembered clearly. Not since the thing in the dark had almost crossed the threshold. The 13 objects began accelerating, not toward the breach forming at the edge of space, but directly toward it. At impossible speed. At impossible precision. As if they already knew exactly where the enemy would appear. In the command silence that followed, a junior Union analyst whispered the question no one wanted to ask. "What are those ships?" No one answered, because deep in classified Earth archives, a single sentence had just been automatically unlocked after centuries of containment failure. "Black Sun is not a weapon system." A pause. Then the second line appeared. "It is the last thing the galaxy built before it learned to be afraid of itself." And at the edge of known space, the breach widened. Something inside it moved closer. Something that had not eaten a world, because it preferred silence instead. And the Black Sun fleet flew straight into it, without hesitation. And for the first time in recorded galactic history, the Abyss seemed to notice it was being hunted. The Black Sun fleet crossed the boundary of known space without resistance. No resistance, because space itself seemed unwilling to acknowledge them. The moment they entered abyssal territory, every external sensor across the Galactic Union went blind. Not damaged, not jammed. Simply refused, like reality had decided those signals were never meant to exist. Inside the lead vessel, silence was absolute. 13 ships. 13 crews. Not a single unnecessary movement. Commander Eric Venn stood at the center of the command chamber, his reflection fractured across layered holographic glass. He looked human in every visible way, too human, some might have said, but his eyes carried the weight of something older than most civilizations. Behind him, tactical officers monitored the unfolding distortion ahead. Space there was wrong. Stars did not bend. They hesitated, as if unsure whether they were allowed to continue existing. "Contact range in 12 minutes, a voice reported. No fear, no urgency, just fact. That was the doctrine of Black Sun. Emotion was irrelevant to outcomes. But even doctrine could not erase what came next. The breach opened like a wound in the fabric of reality. And something stepped through. At first it was shape without form, an impossible geometry folding in on itself, layered with shadows that moved independently of any physical structure. Then came the sound, but not through audio channels. It arrived directly inside thought. A pressure, a memory of screaming. One of the forward ships immediately lost 2 crew members. No explosion, no impact, their existence simply disconnected. Eric did not react. "Stabilize perception filters," he ordered. The fleet obeyed instantly. And then the enemy revealed itself more fully. The demons. But the word felt insufficient. These were not creatures in any biological sense. They were distortions wearing intention. Each movement rewrote surrounding physics. Where they passed, light failed to decide its direction. One Union researcher observing remotely would later describe them as anger-given geometry. The demons did not advance immediately. They observed. And in that observation, something unsettling occurred. They recognized the fleet, not as enemies, but as something remembered. A ripple spread through the abyssal formations, a pause almost like hesitation. Then came the voice, not spoken, not transmitted, injected directly into every Black Sun mind simultaneously. "You were not meant to wake." The words carried weight that collapsed emotional suppression protocols in 3 separate vessels. One pilot screamed before his neural dampeners re-engaged. Eric stepped forward. Engage, defensive doctrine Sigma 7. Weapons systems activated. But nothing fired. Not because they were disabled. Because space refused to complete the command. Energy beams formed and then folded back into themselves, as if the universe had rejected the concept of attack. The demons shifted, and reality fractured in response. Entire regions of vacuum twisted into spirals of inverted light. Then the assault began. Not physical, conceptual. The demons projected futures. Every soldier on board Black Sun saw Earth burning under endless skis of blackened stars. Cities submerged in silence. Human history overwritten by something that did not understand resistance. Some collapsed instantly. Others tore off neural interfaces trying to escape visions that were not visions. but probabilities forced into perception. Psychological breach at 40%, someone shouted. Eric did not raise his voice. Lock cognitive anchors, he said calmly. But sir, that is an order. And then he stepped into the central projection chamber. The abyss looked back at him. And for the first time, Eric spoke directly into it. Not through systems, not through translation layers, but as raw intention shaped into words. You're inefficient, he said. The demons paused. Not because they understood insult, but because they did not understand irrelevance. Eric continued. We've seen extinction. We've lived through silence. This, he gestured toward the collapsing projections. This is predictable. The abyss reacted. Space trembled. Then something unexpected happened. The demons retreated half a step. Not fear. Recognition. As if something buried deep inside them had just been disturbed. Then came the message again, stronger now, layered with something almost like emotion. Black Sun has memory. Across 3 ships, alarms triggered simultaneously. Because that phrase did not belong in any known database. It was not a tactical classification. It was a warning from something older than the current galaxy. Eric returned to the command bridge. Report. A pause. Then, sir, enemy formations are restructuring, but not around us. Then what are they doing? The officer hesitated. They're forming a corridor. Silence fell. A corridor meant passage. Not combat. Not defense. A path. And it led deeper into the abyss. Toward something even the demons refused to face directly. Eric stared at the readings. Because for the first time since the mission began, the enemy was not trying to stop them. It was guiding them. And somewhere beyond the distortion field, something massive shifted closer. Something that made even the demons hesitate before speaking its presence aloud. Eric's hand tightened slightly. Change course, he said. To where, sir? The navigator asked. Eric looked at the abyss opening ahead. And answered quietly. To whatever they are afraid of. The corridor widened instantly. As if the universe itself had just agreed. And deep inside the darkness ahead, something began to notice the approaching humans more clearly. For the first time, not as prey, not as threat, but as interruption, the corridor of abyssal space did not behave like a path. It behaved like an agreement. As Black Sun advanced deeper, the fractured geometry of reality stabilized just enough to allow passage, yet everything around them remained wrong. Stars flickered in and out of existence. Distance lost consistency, as if the universe was forgetting how to measure itself. Inside the fleet, sensors struggled to maintain coherent readings. Navigation drift increasing, but coordinates are stable, a technician reported. That's not possible, another muttered. Eric Venn did not look away from the forward display. It is possible, he said quietly, if space is being translated instead of traveled. No one asked what that meant. They already knew the answer would be worse than ignorance. Ahead, the corridor widened. And the demons were everywhere. Not attacking. Observing. They moved alongside the fleet like shadows attached to reality's edges. Every time a Black Sun vessel adjusted position, the abyssal entities mirrored the movement, not in imitation, but in acknowledgement, like predators walking beside something they could not classify. Then came the whisper again. Not in sound. In memory. Each crew member suddenly remembered something they had never lived. A battlefield beneath a dead sky. A war without enemies. A silence that had teeth. Several soldiers collapsed, clutching their heads. Neural feedback spikes, someone shouted. But Eric raised a hand. Hold. The system stabilized. Barely. And then Unit 07 spoke, his voice strained, like it was coming from 2 places at once. They're not showing us fear, he said. A pause. They're showing us recognition. Eric turned slightly. Explain. Unit 07 stared at the abyssal corridor ahead. It's like they remember us, but not as we are now. Silence stretched. Then the corridor shifted again, and something massive moved just beyond perception. At first, it appeared as a gravitational anomaly, too large to map, too distant to define. But as Black Sun progressed, the anomaly responded, adjusting its position relative to them. Not approaching, not retreating, circling, like something studying an unfamiliar variable. Then the demons broke formation for the first time. Not in panic, in reverence. The abyssal entities parted to either side of the corridor, forming a living boundary. Their shifting geometries slowed, their chaotic forms becoming almost structured, as if something inside them had been commanded to wait. Arik noticed it immediately. "They're clearing the path," he said. "Sir," a pilot responded, "for something that outranks them." That word, outranks, hung in the command chamber like a contradiction. What could outrank demons in their own domain? The answer arrived without warning. Space ahead stopped behaving like space. It became absence with intent, a region where even light refused to commit to existence. The fleet slowed automatically, not from command, from instinct buried deep within systems designed to ignore instinct. Every Black Sun vessel registered the same anomaly. Unknown entity approaching. No classification. No signature. Only impact prediction. Reality compatibility failure in 12 seconds. Arik narrowed his eyes. "Prepare contingency anchors." "Already active, sir," came the reply. But even as they spoke, the anchors began to fail. One by one. Not breaking. Being invalidated. As if the concept of holding reality in place was being rewritten out of possibility. Then it arrived. Not fully. Not physically. But as a pressure behind existence. The corridor collapsed outward, forming a sphere of warped space where causality bent like thin metal under weight. And within that sphere, something noticed them clearly for the first time. The demons reacted instantly. Every abyssal entity froze. Not frozen by command. Frozen by fear that did not belong to them. One of them spoke aloud, its voice fracturing across multiple dimensions. "It is awakening." Arik felt it then. Not through sensors. Through silence. Something vast. Not moving. Becoming aware. The Black Sun fleet remained steady, but for the first time their formation felt small. Not weak, never weak, but insignificant in scale. Unit 07 whispered, barely audible. "That's what they've been running from." The entity shifted slightly, and every system across Black Sun flickered. Not failing. Acknowledging presence. Then a message formed across every display simultaneously. No translation. No encryption. Just direct comprehension. Observation unexpected. A pause. Then another line appeared. Humanity not erased. Arik's expression did not change. But something in the bridge grew heavier. Because that statement should have been impossible. Humanity was not supposed to be known here. Not remembered. Not categorized. The abyss had no reason to retain them. Unless they had been recorded before. Before the seals. Before Black Sun. Before memory itself was rewritten. The entity moved again. And this time the corridor did not respond. It resisted. Reality strained. The demons retreated further back into the edges of perception, refusing proximity. Even they would not stand too close now. Arik finally spoke. "Confirm objective status." A long pause. Then the answer. "Sir, we are no longer approaching a threat zone." "Then what are we approaching?" The technician hesitated. "We are approaching judgment space." Silence fell across the fleet. And ahead, the abyss finally spoke again. Not to the demons. Not to Black Sun. but to the concept of existence itself. And the message was simple. Show me what RMBRS me. The corridor opened wider, and Black Sun moved forward, into something that had not been faced since before the galaxy learned how to name fear. And for the first time, Eric then realized they were not hunting the abyss. They were being evaluated by it. The moment Black Sun crossed into judgment space, the universe stopped behaving like a place. It became a question. Stars no longer burned with consistency. Gravity did not pull, it hesitated, as if waiting for permission. Even time fractured into uneven pulses, skipping like a broken recording that refused to settle into sequence. Inside the fleet, every instrument began reporting contradictions. Distance to target, infinite. Distance to target, 0. Both values are stable. No one corrected it, because correction required trust in physics. And physics had stopped agreeing with itself. Eric then stood motionless at the center of the command chamber, watching the forward display as the abyss reorganized around them. The demons were no longer visible in any conventional sense. They existed now as distant patterns along the edge of perception, like thoughts that refused to form fully. Then the entity revealed itself more clearly. Not as a body, not as energy, but as structure without definition. A sphere of absence surrounded by collapsing light, where every attempt to observe it resulted in partial sensory failure. The human brain refused to process it cleanly. Even Black Sun's cognitive dampeners strained to stabilize perception. And yet it was aware of them. Completely. Instantly. Across all ships, systems synchronized without command. A message appeared. Not translated. Not decoded. Directly understood. You are late. A ripple passed through the fleet. Not fear. Recognition of implication. Unit 07 whispered, "It knows timing." Eric responded without looking away. "Everything knows timing," he said. "Only some things know consequence." The entity shifted. Space bent inward, not collapsing, but folding like a page being reconsidered. And within that fold, something impossible appeared. Fragments of Earth. Not the current Earth. An older version. Forests that no longer existed. Cities that had never been recorded in Union archives. Skies filled with unfamiliar constellations. A past that did not belong to any known timeline. One of the bridge officers stepped back. "That's not real," she said. Eric's voice was calm. "It is real," he replied, "just not ours." The demons reacted violently for the first time. Their formations fractured completely, scattering into chaotic escape vectors. For beings that had maintained coherence across collapsing dimensions, panic was unthinkable. And yet they fled, because they recognized what the entity was doing. It was rewinding observation, testing existence backward. The sphere of judgment expanded slightly, and with it came pressure. Not physical, conceptual. Every Black Sun crew member suddenly felt memories that were not theirs. Worse, memories that were not human. Entire civilizations rising and falling in patterns no history contained. Wars fought with mathematics instead of weapons. Suns extinguished by silence rather than force. Neural overload across 3 vessels, someone shouted. But Eric raised a hand again. "Anchor identity," he ordered. A pause. Then Unit 07 spoke, voice strained. "It's not attacking us." Eric finally turned slightly. "Then what is it doing?" Unit 07 swallowed. "It's checking if we still belong to ourselves." Silence filled the command chamber. Because that was worse than attack. Attack implied hostility. This implied evaluation. The entity spoke again. "Subject classification, human." A pause. Then, status partially recognized. Eric narrowed his eyes. Partially. The sphere expanded again. And suddenly, Black Sun was no longer in judgment space. They were inside memory space. Not theirs. Something older. something buried beneath the foundation of the galaxy itself. They saw it. The first contact. Not with demons, but with something far worse. A blankness that arrived before civilization learned how to differentiate itself from silence. A force that did not destroy life, but removed the possibility of it having ever mattered. The Union never recorded this. Earth never spoke of it, because it had been erased not from records, but from meaning. Eric felt his grip tighten slightly. "This is prehistory containment architecture," he said quietly. No one responded, because the structure around them was reacting. The entity was testing them against the origin of their own survival. And Black Sun, designed as the last defense, was now being compared against the first failure. The demons reappeared at the edge of perception. But they were different now. Smaller, not physically, but in certainty. One of them spoke, voice fractured. "If it RMBRS you fully, you cease to be human." Eric stared at the shifting abyss. "That's not how identity works," he said. The entity paused, as if listening. Then it responded. Observation, disagreement registered. A pulse passed through everything. And suddenly, every Black Sun ship experienced the same vision. Earth, not burning, not destroyed, but rewritten. Humanity existing peacefully, but fundamentally different. No war, no memory of war, no concept of abyss, no Black Sun. A version of humanity that had never needed to become a weapon. A perfect correction. A flawless rewrite. Unit 07 whispered. "That's what it's offering." Eric's eyes darkened. "No," he said quietly. "That's what it's testing." The entity expanded one final time. And the judgment concluded. Across all systems, one final message appeared. Humanity incomplete. A pause. Then, correction available. Silence. Heavy. Absolute. The demons stopped moving entirely. Waiting. Watching. And Eric Venn stepped forward into the center of the bridge, staring directly into the impossible structure ahead. His voice was steady. "What happens," he asked, "if we refuse correction?" The entity did not answer immediately. Because for the first time, it had to calculate. And somewhere deep inside the abyss, something that had judged civilizations for longer than stars had existed. Hesitated, the hesitation lasted only a fraction of a moment. But in judgment space, a fraction of a moment was enough to fracture civilizations. The entity's silence pressed against Black Sun like gravity made of intent. Every system aboard the fleet strained under the weight of being considered, not attacked, not destroyed, simply measured. Then the answer arrived. Not as words, as inevitability. Refusal of correction initiates terminal review. The sphere of judgment tightened. Space around the Black Sun fleet began compressing into layers of impossible geometry. Ships groaned under stresses that had no physical source. Hulls did not bend from force, but from reinterpretation. Inside the command chamber, alarms screamed without sound. "Structural integrity dropping," a technician shouted. But Eric did not move, because moving implied belief in survival as the priority. And Black Sun had been built to operate beyond that belief. Unit 07 stared at the forward display, his voice low. "It's not killing us," he said. "It's deciding whether we can continue existing as we are." A pause. "That's worse." The demons reacted again. But not with panic this time. With withdrawal. Entire formations receded deeper into the edges of perception, abandoning proximity to the judgment sphere entirely. Some of them collapsed into incoherent shapes, unable to maintain identity near the entity's scrutiny. One of them spoke faintly. "It is not a god." A pause filled with dread. "IT is the standard." Eric finally stepped forward. "Standards can be challenged," he said. The entity responded immediately. Observation, Human assertion DATSCTD. The sphere expanded slightly, and then it showed them the truth of itself. Not form, not origin, but function. Across Black Sun's neural interfaces, every crew member saw it simultaneously. Countless galaxies layered like sediment. Civilizations rising, developing, collapsing, not from war but from evaluation. Entire species removed not through destruction, but through correction of probability. Histories edited until only viable patterns remained. A cosmic filtration system. A judge that had never stopped working. And humanity. Humanity was a deviation that had survived too long. Unit 07 staggered slightly. "They've been pruning existence," he whispered. Eric's voice was quiet. "Not pruning," he corrected, "filtering." The entity responded. "Correct." A pause. Then, "You are anomalous survival pattern." The sphere shifted again. And suddenly, Black Sun was shown Earth's true historical record. Not the sanitized version. Not the Union-approved version. But the erased one. Humanity had not always been small. At one point, it had touched the abyss directly. Not as victims, not as prey, but as negotiators. And that negotiation had created Black Sun. A failsafe. A memory weapon. A lock. Eric's expression tightened slightly. "So we weren't built to fight demons," he said quietly. "We were built to argue with you." Silence followed. The entity processed this. And for the first time, it did not immediately classify the statement. Instead, it replayed it. Then again. Then again. Across the fleet, systems flickered as the judgment sphere struggled to categorize the implication. Then came the response. "That is incorrect." A pause. The pressure increased. "You were built to survive review." The demons shifted violently at that statement. Because they understood what it meant. Black Sun was not a weapon. It was a counter-process. A flaw introduced into the judgment system itself. Eric lifted his hand slightly. "Then perform review," he said. The sphere went still. Every system froze. Even time felt uncertain. Then the entity complied. Black Sun was subjected to full existential inspection. Every soldier experienced it simultaneously. Their memories were opened. Not just recent ones. All of them. Every fear. Every decision. Every contradiction. Every moment where humanity chose to continue when logic said it should end. Some broke instantly. Others remained steady. Unit 07 fell to one knee, but did not collapse. Eric stood at the center of it all, unmoving. And the entity watched. For the first time, not scanning data, but witnessing choice. Then something unexpected happened. The judgment sphere began to destabilize. Not from attack, from inconsistency. Because humanity did not behave like a unified system. It behaved like contradiction held together by will. The entity spoke. Internal paradox DATSCTD. A pause. Survival without optimization. The sphere flickered. Is non-standard. The demons reacted instantly. Because they recognized instability. And instability in judgment space meant one thing. Change. Eric narrowed his eyes. "What's happening?" he asked quietly. Unit 07 looked up. "It's never seen something it can't correct," he said. The entity expanded one final time. And delivered its conclusion. Humanity cannot be resolved. A pause. Then, reclassification required. The sphere fractured. Not breaking outward, but inward, as if the concept of judgment itself was being forced to reevaluate its own existence. The demons began to scream, not in pain, but in realization, because if humanity could not be corrected, then the system that judged them might not be absolute. Eric took a slow breath and asked the final question. If you cannot correct us, what do you do next? The entity paused for the longest time yet, then answered, not to Eric, not to Black Sun, but to itself. We observe what CORRECTSUS, and somewhere beyond the collapsing sphere, something far older than judgment space began to awaken. Because for the first time in recorded existence, the universe had encountered something it could not finalize. Judgment space did not break. It reoriented, like a mind suddenly realizing it was not the only one thinking. The collapse of the correction protocol did not cause explosion or silence. Instead, reality itself shifted into a new configuration, less like a system ending and more like a system reconsidering its own assumptions. The sphere that had defined existence as correctable now flickered between states of certainty and doubt. Inside Black Sun, alarms stopped mid-scream. Not because they were disabled, but because the concept of alarm lost relevance for a few seconds. Then came the shift. The entity was no longer solely observing humanity. It was observing itself. And that was the moment everything changed. Across the fleet, every crew member saw the same impossible overlay. The judgment entity, once an unshakable cosmic standard, now layered with contradictions. Its structure was no longer singular. It contained echoes, fragments, residual decisions made across eons of erased civilizations. Unit 07 whispered, "It's remembering its own failures." Eric Venn narrowed his eyes. "Not remembering," he corrected, "reprocessing." The demons reacted instantly. For the first time since entering abyssal space, they moved toward Black Sun instead of away from it. Not in aggression, but in urgency. One of them spoke, its voice no longer fractured, but sharpened by something close to clarity. If it QSTONS itself, it BCOMES vulnerable. That statement alone was enough to freeze half the Black Sun crew. Because vulnerability did not belong in this layer of existence. But the entity responded. Immediately. Observation, internal inconsistency confirmed. The sphere pulsed. And suddenly, Black Sun was no longer in judgment space. They were inside origin space. Not where existence was measured, but where existence was decided. Eric felt it instantly. A shift so profound it bypassed all sensory systems. Even his trained perception struggled to anchor itself. "Reports," he ordered. "Silence." Then, "Sir, we are not being evaluated anymore," a technician said slowly. A pause. "We are being used as reference." That word landed heavier than any weapon impact. Reference. Black Sun was no longer the subject of judgment. They were the comparison point for judgment itself. The entity was now measuring its own structure against humanity's inconsistency. And finding gaps. The sphere fractured again. Not collapsing, expanding outward into multiple overlapping layers. Each layer contained a version of the entity that had made different decisions across different epochs of existence. And they were arguing, not in sound, in contradiction. Across the fleet, systems flickered wildly as overlapping truths collided. One layer stated, "All deviation must be removed." Another contradicted, "Deviation is the only source of adaptation." A third, "Humanity should not exist." And then, "Humanity is the only thing that should not have been able to exist, and did." The demons began to retreat again, but not in fear this time. In confusion, because confusion inside judgment space was unprecedented. Eric stepped forward. "You're unstable," he said calmly. The entity responded instantly. Clarification, stability is a human concept. A pause. Then, "We are consistency across infinite contradictions." Unit 07 shook his head slightly. "No," he said quietly. "You were, now you're comparing yourself to us." That statement triggered something. Across all layers of the entity, attention converged. Focused on Black Sun, on humanity, on the anomaly that refused correction and instead introduced comparison. And for the first time, the judge stopped judging. It started learning. Not intentionally, not willingly, but inevitably, because something inside the system had encountered a variable it could not eliminate. The demons reacted violently. Their structures destabilized further. One of them screamed across dimensions. "It is CONTMINATING the standard." Eric turned slightly. "Contamination implies purity," he said. The demons did not respond, because they could no longer agree on what purity meant. The entity pulsed again, and spoke with something dangerously close to curiosity. "Define humanity." Silence fell across Black Sun, not because they lacked answer, but because no answer could survive intact in judgment space. Unit 07 spoke first. "We adapt." A pause. "We break." Another pause. "And we continue anyway." The entity processed this, then responded. Insufficient definition. Eric stepped forward. "You want precision," he said. "A beat. Then you won't understand us." The sphere flickered. For the first time, there was no immediate response, because understanding required reduction, and humanity refused reduction. Across the abyssal corridor, something shifted. The entity's multiple layers began collapsing inward again, not into singularity, but into synthesis. It was trying to resolve contradiction not by elimination, but by integration. The demons froze completely, because they recognized what that meant. If judgment adapted instead of corrected, then nothing in existence was final anymore. Not rules, not hierarchy, not fear. Eric noticed it too. "This is new," he said quietly. Unit 07 nodded. "It's becoming something else." The entity spoke again, but this time its voice was no longer singular. It was layered, evolving. Humanity is being reclassified. A pause, not as error. The sphere expanded, but as unresolved equation. Silence, then the final line. Observation continues. And just like that, judgment space stopped trying to end them, and started trying to understand them instead. Eric exhaled slowly, because that was the most dangerous shift of all. Not survival, not destruction, but attention, and somewhere deep within the abyss, something far older than the entity finally stirred again. Because if the judge was now learning, then the thing that once created the judge might also be listening. The transformation did not announce itself. There was no rupture, no cosmic alarm, no collapse of space. Instead, judgment space simply listened harder, as if the act of understanding humanity had triggered something deeper beneath the entity's structure, something that had never been activated, because nothing before had required reciprocal awareness. The layered spheres of judgment stabilized into a new configuration. Not one truth, not infinite contradictions, but dialogue. Inside Black Sun, systems that had once reported chaos now showed something even more unsettling. Coherence, but not the kind they were designed to interpret. "Sir," a technician said slowly, staring at the readings, "it's synchronizing with us." Eric Venn did not answer immediately, because synchronization implied equality, and nothing in this region of space was supposed to consider equality. Unit 07 stood near the edge of the bridge, his expression tight. "It's not mirroring us," he said quietly. "It's aligning with our inconsistencies." A pause. "That's worse." Outside the fleet, the abyss had changed shape again. The demons were no longer retreating or advancing. They floated in fractured formation, as if unsure whether they still belonged to the same hierarchy they once enforced. Their geometry flickered between aggression and uncertainty. One of them spoke, but its voice carried hesitation now. The standard is no longer single. Another responded. Then what are we measuring against? No answer followed, because for the first time in their existence, they had no agreed definition of judgment. And in that vacuum, Black Sun moved forward, not by command, but because there was no longer anything physically preventing it. Eric watched the forward projection. The entity had fully reorganized. What had once been a sphere of absolute evaluation now resembled a vast, layered network, like a mind discovering parts of itself it had previously ignored. And within that network, humanity was no longer an anomaly. It was a reference point that refused stability. Then the entity spoke again. But its tone had changed. Not command. Not classification. Inquiry. Why do you continue when optimal termination is available? Silence filled the bridge. That question was not aimed at survival mechanics. It was aimed at meaning. Unit 07 answered first. We don't calculate continuation, he said. A pause. We experience it. The entity processed this. Across multiple layers, contradictions formed again, but this time they did not destabilize the system. They refined it. Eric stepped forward. You're trying to optimize us, he said. The entity responded immediately. Yes. A pause. Then, you resist optimization. Eric nodded slightly. Correct. Another pause. Then the entity did something unprecedented. It projected something new. Not a future, not a past, but a possibility that had never been executed before. Across Black Sun systems, every crew member saw it. A version of reality where judgment space had never been created. Where civilizations evolved without correction systems. Where demons did not exist as fear responses. Where humanity expanded without ever encountering the abyss. A peaceful timeline. Clean. Efficient. Empty of contradiction. Unit 07 whispered, that's what it wants. Eric narrowed his eyes. No, he said. That's what it thinks we would choose. The projection lingered. Waiting. Then the entity asked again. Do you accept correction into stability? The demons went completely still. Even they understood what was being offered. A perfect universe. No suffering. No abyss. No fear. But also, no deviation. No unpredictability. No humanity as it existed now. Eric stared at the projection for a long moment. Then stepped forward. No, he said simply. Silence. The projection flickered. The entity responded. Elaborate. Eric's voice was steady. Because stability without contradiction is just termination with delay. A pause. Then Unit 07 added quietly. We don't survive because it makes sense. Another pause. We survive because we don't stop when it doesn't. The entity processed both responses simultaneously. And something began to change again. Not destabilization. Not contradiction. But curiosity deepening into recursion. Across abyssal space, the demons reacted sharply. One of them spoke. It is learning rejection as input. Another followed. Then it will learn to adapt to failure. And that realization triggered panic, not among Black Sun, but among the abyss itself. Because adaptation meant evolution. And evolution meant the judge was no longer fixed. Eric noticed it instantly. It's no longer just evaluating us, he said quietly. It's using us as a development model. Unit 07 turned slightly. And if we change it? Eric finished the sentence. Then we change what the abyss becomes. Silence. Heavy. Final. The entity spoke once more. But now its voice carried something no one had heard before. Not authority. Not analysis. Not even curiosity. Anticipation. Humanity, OBSRVD behavior is an ONRAPATABLE. A pause. Continuation required. The corridor of abyssal space widened again. But this time it was not a path of passage. It was a path of study. And Black Sun moved forward. Not as a weapon. Not as a lock. But as the first variable the abyss had ever failed to predict correctly. And somewhere deeper than judgment space, something ancient finally acknowledged the change. Because when the judge begins to learn, something else eventually begins to judge the judge. The abyss did not collapse. It opened further. Judgment space, once a sealed architecture of cosmic evaluation, now resembled something closer to a living mind, expanding beyond its original constraints. Every layer that had once enforced correction now branched into exploration, replaying human contradictions as if they were discoveries instead of errors. Black Sun drifted through it like a question that refused to end. And for the first time since the fleet entered abyssal territory, there was no hostility. Only attention. Commander Eric Venn stood at the center of the command chamber, watching the forward projection. The demons were gone now, not destroyed, not fled, but absorbed into the shifting structure of judgment itself, as if their role in the system had been reassigned. Unit 07 spoke quietly. "It's changed completely," he said. Eric nodded once. "It stopped being a wall," he replied. "Now it's a mirror that moves." Outside the fleet, the abyss pulsed with slow, deliberate rhythm. No attacks, no collapse waves, only structured observation expanding outward like thought learning how to think about itself. Then the entity spoke, but its voice no longer came from a single point. It came from everywhere, across every system, across every mind, even beyond perception. Humanity has altered observation behavior. A pause. Therefore, observation will alter humanity. Silence followed. Not fear, not anticipation. Something deeper. Understanding. Eric stepped forward slightly. "You're still trying to correct us," he said calmly. The entity responded instantly. "Incorrect." A pause. Then, "We are INCRPORATNGU." The words landed like gravity revering direction. Unit 07 stiffened. "Incorporating," he repeated quietly. The entity expanded its presence one final time, and reality around Black Sun shifted into a vast, unfolding structure, like an infinite archive rewriting itself in real time. Every human decision, every contradiction, every refusal of optimization, all of it was being integrated into the abyssal system. Not erased, not overwritten. Learned. Eric's voice lowered. "So this is what we were to you," he said. "Data." The entity paused, then corrected itself. "Not data. Variance." A long silence. Then the truth revealed itself in full clarity. Black Sun was never meant to destroy the abyss. It was never meant to seal it. It was never even meant to resist it. It was meant to introduce instability into a perfect system that had stopped evolving. The abyss had been unchanged for eons, not because it was stable, but because it was complete. And completion had become stagnation. Unit 07 whispered, "We were never soldiers." Eric finished it. "We were disruption." Outside the fleet, the abyssal structure began shifting again, but not toward hostility. Toward expansion of perspective. The entity spoke once more. "Humanity cannot be finalized." A pause. "Therefore humanity will remain active variable." The demons, what remained of their conceptual presence, reformed briefly along the edges of perception, but they were different now. No longer hunters, no longer fear-born enforcers. They were observers too. One of them spoke softly. "The standard is no longer above." Another replied, "It is learning from below." Eric exhaled slowly. "So what now?" he asked. For the first time, the entity did not respond immediately, because the answer was not classification. It was continuation. Then it spoke. Now we observe what you become when you are observed. The corridor of abyssal space reopened, not as a path, but as an ongoing interface between human contradiction and cosmic structure. Black Sun did not retreat. They did not advance. They simply remained, because there was nowhere else to go that mattered anymore. And Earth, far beyond the abyss, remained unaware that its forgotten force was no longer fighting a war, but participating in the evolution of something that once called itself absolute. Eric looked at his crew one last time. "We didn't survive the abyss," he said quietly. "We changed what it means." The abyss responded, not as command, not as judgment, but as acknowledgement. Continuation accepted. And beyond the edge of all known reality, something far older than judgment space finally shifted again. Not as threat, not as entity, but as awareness noticing that its own creation had begun to evolve beyond instruction. Because now, even the abyss had become the student.